The cursed campsite. The van bumped along the neglected trail, headlights cutting through the twilight as we approached the infamous Camp Lakewood. It was Friday the 13th, and in defiance of all warnings, my friends and I had decided it would be the perfect night for an adventure. The stories about the campsite where several campers had mysteriously vanished decades ago only added to its allure. They were probably just urban legends anyway, we told ourselves. As we unloaded our gear under the dimming light, the air felt unnaturally still. Chills trickled down my spine as the final rays of the sun dipped behind the trees, leaving us enveloped in the creeping dusk. "Let's set up over there, near the lake," suggested Alex, pointing towards a small clearing where the water mirrored the darkening sky. We pitched our tents and lit a campfire, the crackling flames casting long shadows across the ground. As the night deepened, we huddled around the fire, sharing jokes and stories, trying to keep the eerie quiet of the forest at bay. It wasn't until Mark, always the prankster, mimicked a ghostly wail that the mood shifted from jovial to a nervous tension that none of us wanted to acknowledge. "Did you guys hear about the curse?" Mark's voice lowered, his eyes gleaming in the firelight as he looked around at us. "Cut it out, Mark," Sarah chided, though I noticed her glance nervously towards the dense thicket of trees surrounding us. "No, really," he continued, undeterred. "They say a spirit haunts this place, some old settler who was wronged. He cursed the land, so anyone who spends the night here vanishes, never to be found again." "Great bedtime story," I muttered, rolling my eyes, though the unease had already planted itself deep within me. As the night wore on, strange sounds began to drift through the trees, the rustling of leaves, a soft whispering that seemed almost human. One by one, my friends excused themselves to their tents, until only I remained by the dying fire, my mind racing with every small noise in the darkness. That's when I noticed the old, weather-beaten path leading into the woods. Compelled by a mix of fear and curiosity, I grabbed a flashlight and decided to explore. Maybe this was a way to prove to myself that there was nothing to be scared of. But as I walked deeper into the forest, an inexplicable coldness enveloped me, and the air grew thick with the smell of decay. Suddenly, my light landed on a peculiar symbol carved into a tree. It was a circle with an intricate pattern of lines and what looked like an eye in the center. It felt ominous, and as I scanned the area, I realized that these carvings appeared on multiple trees, forming a sort of trail. Following them, I stumbled upon an abandoned cabin, its windows boarded and the door slightly ajar. Pushing open the door, the smell of mold and old wood assaulted my senses. Inside, I found a small, cluttered room with a table on which lay an old diary. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the writing was still legible. It detailed the life of a settler named Jeremiah, who had been cheated out of his land. Out of vengeance, he had cursed the land, vowing that none who trespassed would find peace or leave. As I read, a cold draft swept through the cabin, and the door slammed shut. Heart pounding, I raced back to the campsite, only to find it deserted. My friends' tents were open, their belongings scattered. They were gone, just like the campers before them. Panic surged through me as I remembered Jeremiah's curse. I had to break it before midnight, or we'd all be doomed to the same fate as those who had vanished years ago. Frantically, I returned to the cabin to scour the diary for any clue on how to break the curse. The answer lay in the final pages. Jeremiah had loved a woman named Eliza, who was buried under the oak tree by the lake. Only by returning his locket, which was hidden under the floorboards of the cabin, to her grave would the curse be lifted. I tore the floorboards apart, heart racing as I uncovered an old, rusted locket. Clutching it tightly, I sprinted to the lake, using my flashlight to find the largest oak tree. There, I dug with my hands, driven by desperation, until my finger scraped against a small, crude stone marking Eliza's resting place. I placed the locket on the grave, whispering a plea for forgiveness to Jeremiah's spirit. The wind howled, and the ground trembled beneath me as if in response. Then, everything fell silent. I waited, breath held, until the sounds of the forest slowly returned. Cautiously, I walked back to the campsite. One by one, my friends emerged from the trees, confused and scared, but unharmed. We packed up without speaking and left Camp Lakewood behind, the morning sun casting long shadows over the land that was once cursed. As we drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see Jeremiah's spirit watching us. But there was only the empty road and the rising sun, a new day breaking over Camp Lakewood, as if in silence over the secrets it held. As we drove away, the tension gradually eased from our shoulders, yet the silence remained. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts, grappling with the night's surreal events. The sun, rising bold and bright, seemed almost mocking in its cheerfulness compared to the darkness we had just escaped. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed within us. The laughter and casual conversation that had filled the van on our way to the camp were now replaced by a heavy quietness. It wasn't just the fear or the relief. It was the realization that the world held secrets far darker and deeper than we had ever imagined. Alex was the first to break the silence. Did that really just happen? His voice was a mix of wonder and disbelief. Yeah, it did, I replied, keeping my eyes on the road, watching the familiar scenery of the town approach. Sarah turned around from the front seat, her face pale but composed. What are we going to tell everyone? Who's going to believe us? We tell them nothing, Mark said firmly from the back. Who would believe a story about curses and spirits? They'd think we're joking or crazy. The rest of us agreed silently. We knew the truth, and that was enough. Sharing it would only invite scrutiny and skepticism that none of us were prepared to handle. The van pulled into Sarah's driveway, the first stop of our return journey. As she got out, she paused and looked back at us. This doesn't change anything, right? We're still friends. Of course, I reassured her. It's just something that happened to us. It doesn't define us. But even as I said it, I felt the weight of the night press down on us, an unspoken acknowledgement that things could never truly return to the way they were before. Each goodbye felt more like a closure, a subtle retreat back to individual realities where we could try to forget and move on. After dropping off Alex and Mark, I drove home feeling the solitude of the van now heavier than ever. Parking in the driveway, I sat for a moment, the engine off and the silence deafening. When I finally stepped inside my house, the normalcy of it felt strange, almost foreign. I dropped my keys on the table and noticed something peculiar, a faint outline of dirt that hadn't been there before. My heart raced as I traced it with my finger. It was a small, circular pattern, remarkably similar to the symbols carved into the trees at the camp. A chill ran through me. Could it be a coincidence? Or had something followed us back from the camp? Sleep did not come easily that night. Every shadow seemed to move, and every noise seemed to whisper secrets in the dark. When morning came, I called Alex. Hey, did anything weird happen when you got home last night? My voice was tentative, hoping for a no, yet fearing the answer. There was a pause, and then, actually, yeah, I found some mud and leaves at my doorstep. But my parents said there was a storm last night. Why? Did something happen to you? I explained about the dirt pattern and how it resembled the symbols from the camp. Alex was silent for a moment. Maybe we weren't supposed to leave. Or maybe part of the curse is that it never really lets go. The thought sent shivers down my spine. We agreed to meet later and discuss what to do next. But as I hung up, a deep sense of dread settled in me. The day passed in a blur, my mind constantly returning to the camp. By the time I met with Alex and later, Mark and Sarah, I had convinced myself that we needed to go back. There was something we had missed, some part of the curse that remained tied to us. "We need to go back," I told them as we sat in the local diner, our meals untouched. "Something's not right. I think the curse. I think it's still with us." They exchanged nervous glances, the fear evident in their eyes. But it was Mark who finally spoke up, his voice resolute. "Then we go back. We have to end this once and for all." Preparations were made swiftly, and by the next Friday the 13th, we found ourselves once again at the gates of Camp Lakewood. The air was thick with an unspoken fear, but also a determination. Whatever it took, we were going to break the curse completely. As we stepped into the camp, the familiar surroundings now looked sinister, the trees like silent sentinels, watching our every move. But we were not the naive group of friends who had first ventured here. We were survivors, bound by a shared secret and the determination to reclaim our lives from the shadows that hunted us. And so, with every step deeper into the woods, we braced ourselves for the final confrontation, ready to face whatever darkness awaited us in the heart of Camp Lakewood. The Mirror of Misfortune. On Friday the 13th, the air was thick with the kind of chill that clings to your skin and seeps into your bones. As a struggling antique shop owner, I had developed an eye for the unusual and the macabre, treasures that would attract the more eccentric clientele to my little shop on the edge of town. That morning, I had stumbled upon a beautiful, ornate mirror at an estate sale. It was rumored to have once belonged to a witch executed in the 17th century. Laughing off the superstitions as nothing more than myths to increase its value, I acquired the mirror, convinced it would be the centerpiece that would finally draw more visitors. I placed the mirror prominently at the rear of the shop, its frame intricately carved with what looked like twisting vines and screaming faces, if one looked long enough. It didn't take long for the mirror to make an impression. Customers drawn to its allure gazed into it, only to recoil in horror, claiming they saw grotesque visions of their demise. A woman whispered that her reflection had decayed before her eyes, while a young man fled the shop, swearing he'd seen his own body hanging from a tree in the reflection. Initially, I dismissed these as figments of overactive imaginations, spurred by the mirror's grim history. However, when news of accidents fatal and near fatal began to circulate, all involving my customers, I could no longer ignore the truth. The mirror did not merely reflect, it reveled in their fears, feeding on them. Determined to rid myself of this cursed item and end its reign of terror, I began to delve into the history of the witch it had belonged to. The local library held dusty records of the town's grim past, where I learned of Abigail, a healer turned outcast, accused of witchcraft after a series of unexplainable deaths in the late 1600s. It was said she cursed her accusers through a mirror, vowing that none who wronged her would find peace, even in death. With this knowledge, I understood the urgency of breaking the curse. I scoured occult books and consulted with self-proclaimed witches and mediums, but nothing seemed promising until I met an elderly woman known for her deep knowledge of spiritual cleansings and curse reversals. She warned me that the curse was tied to Abigail's remains, which had been buried in an unmarked grave at the crossroads near the old forest. The solution was chilling. I had to retrieve a bone from her grave and burn it in front of the mirror. Armed with a shovel and a desperate courage, I set out on the next full moon, as instructed. The forest was eerily silent as I dug at the crossroads, my heart pounding with every thud of the shovel against the cold earth. When I finally unearthed a small, fragile bone, the air around me grew colder, and I felt the sting of unseen eyes upon me. Rushing back to the shop, with the bone wrapped in a piece of black velvet, I prepared to confront the mirror. As I placed the bone before it and set it aflame, the mirror's surface swirled with a smoky darkness, and Abigail's face appeared, her expression twisted with both rage and sorrow. She spoke in a voice that was but a whisper, yet filled the room, telling me her side of the story of betrayal and the cursed ball of desperation and unimaginable pain. As her bone turned to ash, the face in the mirror wept tears of blood, and then, with a loud crack, the glass shattered, scattering fragments like black snow around the shop. I felt a wave of relief, thinking it was over, but the peace was short-lived. The next day, amid the mess, as I contemplated closing the shop for good, a food delivery arrived, a simple mistake as I hadn't ordered anything. The delivery driver, a young kid, insisted it was paid for and meant for me. Puzzled, I accepted the package, finding inside a gourmet meal fit for a celebration. Thinking it a strange but welcome gesture, perhaps from a neighbor relieved at the cessation of accidents, I sat down to eat. With each bite, however, I felt a growing unease. The food was delicious, yet there was a faint, bitter aftertaste that I couldn't place. By the time I finished, the room began to spin wildly, and my skin turned icy cold. Stumbling to the bathroom, I caught my reflection in a small hand mirror. By the sink my eyes were hollow, my face pale and gaunt. I watched in horror as my reflection smirked back at me, then spoke in Abigail's voice, "You freed me, but you also freed my curse." Panicked, I tried to leave, but the doors and windows were immovably sealed. The room filled with shadows, whispering echoes of the past, each one accusing me of deeds I had never committed. The mirror might have been shattered, but its curse had seeped into the very walls of my home, perhaps even into me. As I sank to the floor, the whispers grew louder, and I understood that breaking the curse was not the end. It was only the beginning of a new, more horrifying chapter. My only hope was to find out who sent the food, tracing back the delivery to its source. If someone had intentionally sent it on this particular day, they might know more about the curse's true nature. Maybe it was someone linked to Abigail's past or another victim seeking to spread the misery. I needed answers, and I needed them fast, before the curse consumed me completely, turning my life into a mirror image of Abigail's torment. The minutes stretched into hours as I sat on the bathroom floor, the whispers of the cursed echoing in my mind. With each passing moment, the shadows seemed to grow darker, the air thicker with the weight of the curse that now bound me. Desperation clawed at my chest as I struggled to make sense of my predicament. How had the curse followed me home? Who had sent the food delivery, knowing full well the horrors it would unleash? With trembling hands, I reached for my phone, fingers fumbling over the screen as I searched for any clue that might lead me to the source of the cursed meal. The delivery app was still open, displaying the details of the order paid for in cash. No return address, no contact information. But then, a glimmer of hope flickered in the darkness. A name. It was barely visible, hidden in the fine print of the delivery receipt. But there it was, a name I recognized from the town's history, a name linked to the tragic tale of Abigail the witch. It couldn't be a coincidence. Someone in town knew more about the curse than they were letting on. Someone who had orchestrated this twisted game of cat and mouse. With renewed determination, I dragged myself to my feet, every muscle screaming in protest as I made my way to the front door. The house felt like a prison now, its walls closing in around me, suffocating me with the weight of its secrets. Outside, the world was shrouded in darkness, the moon hanging low in the sky like a silent witness to my plight. But I refused to be cowed by fear. If I was to break this curse once and for all, I needed answers, and I would find them no matter the cost. As I made my way through the deserted streets, the town seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next twist in this twisted tale. But I paid no heed to the eerie silence. My mind focused on one thing, and one thing only, finding the person responsible for unleashing this nightmare upon me. It didn't take long to reach the address linked to the name on the delivery receipt, a rundown cottage on the outskirts of town. Its windows boarded up, and its door hanging off its hinges. It was the perfect hiding place for someone who wanted to stay hidden, someone who knew the true extent of Abigail's curse. With a deep breath, I pushed open the door and stepped inside, the darkness swallowing me whole. But I refused to be intimidated. I had come too far to turn back now. As I searched the cottage, my heart sank with each empty room and dusty corner. There was no sign of anyone, no clue to the identity of the person who had sent the cursed meal. But then, just as I was about to give up hope, I stumbled upon a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards, a small, weathered book, its pages yellowed with age. With trembling hands, I flipped through the pages, my eyes widening in disbelief as I read the words inscribed within. It was a journal written by none other than Abigail herself, detailing her descent into darkness and her relentless pursuit of vengeance against those who had wronged her. And there, on the final page, was a name that sent shivers down my spine and filled me with a newfound sense of dread. It was the name of someone I had known my entire life, someone who had always seemed kind and trustworthy. But now, as I stood in the darkness of the abandoned cottage, I realized that nothing was as it seemed. The curse had twisted everything, turning friends into enemies and allies into adversaries. With a heavy heart, I knew what I had to do. I had to confront the person responsible for this nightmare, to demand answers, and to put an end to the curse once and for all. But as I stepped back out into the night, the moon casting long shadows across a deserted street, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning of a much darker and more dangerous journey, one that would test my courage and resilience in ways I could never have imagined.